44 Training Grounds. One massive, fenced-off forest crawling with monsters that would make a Chūnin sweat. 26 genin teams about to walk into it with nothing but a scroll, a 5-day deadline, and whatever they learned in the last few weeks of training. That's the second Chūnin exam. That's the Forest of Death. And normally, this is where Team 7 shines as a team. Sasuke's Sharingan picking apart illusions, Sakura's book-smart instincts sniffing out genjutsu before it even lands, Naruto's stubborn refusal to quit holding the whole thing together when everything goes sideways. That's the formula. That's what you've seen 100 times. But what if that formula broke on day 1? What if, before the sun even set on their first night in that forest, Naruto Uzumaki was completely, utterly alone, no teammates, no scroll, no plan, with nothing but his own 2 hands and whatever was left of his will to survive? Stick around. Because that's exactly what's about to happen. And if you want to see how far one loud, stubborn, orange jumpsuit-wearing genin can go with absolutely nobody watching his back, make sure you're subscribed and that bell is on, because this is a ride you don't want to miss a second of. Let's get into it. The gates of Training Ground 44 loomed like the entrance to something that had swallowed people before and fully intended to do it again. Chain-link fences stretched in both directions farther than the eye could comfortably track, topped with warning signs that weren't decoration. Beyond the fence line, the trees didn't so much grow as loom, packed so dense and so tall that the canopy blotted out most of the afternoon light, turning midday into a permanent, murky dusk somewhere past the tree line. Anko Mitarashi stood in front of it all with the kind of grin that made genin reconsider their life choices. Forest of Death, she said, drawing the words out like she was savoring them. Cute name, right? Wait till you see why we call it that. Naruto Uzumaki stood near the front of the crowd of genin, hands laced behind his head, trying very hard to look like a guy who wasn't the tiniest bit nervous. Sasuke Uchiha stood a few feet to his left, arms crossed, face doing that thing where it managed to look both bored and alert at the same time. Sakura Haruno hovered between them, eyes scanning the fence line, the other genin teams, the massive forest beyond, cataloging threats the way she always did before a fight even started. You've gotta be kidding me, Naruto muttered, craning his neck to try and see over the tree line. This is where the exam happens? It looks like something's gonna eat us the second we walk in. That's kind of the point, dead last, Sasuke said without looking at him. I wasn't talking to you, jerk. Would you two focus, Sakura hissed, elbowing them both. This is serious. People die in exams like this. That shut them both up. Not because Sakura was scary, though she absolutely could be, but because for once, she wasn't exaggerating. Genin had died in previous Chūnin exams. Everyone standing in that clearing knew it, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. Anko went through the rules with the practiced ease of someone who'd explained this a dozen times and enjoyed every telling. 2 scrolls, heaven and earth, 1 of each needed to pass. 5 days to reach the tower at the center of the forest. Team survival was the baseline requirement. Lose a teammate, and you were out, no exceptions. No opening the scrolls before the tower unless you had a very strong desire to find out what happened when you did. And one more thing, Anko added, tossing a kunai over her shoulder without even looking, catching a would-be pickpocket by his collar with the blade an inch from his cheek. The genin she'd caught went pale as a sheet. Anybody thinking about cheating, don't. This forest doesn't care how clever you think you are. It'll eat you regardless. Naruto swallowed hard. Beside him, Sakura's hand found the strap of her pack and gripped it a little tighter. You scared, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked, trying for casual and missing by a wide margin. No, she lied. Liar. Shut up, Naruto. Sasuke said nothing. But his hand rested near his kunai pouch, and his eyes tracked the tree line the way a predator tracks movement in tall grass. If he was scared, he wasn't showing it. If he wasn't scared, that was arguably worse. Team 7 was handed an earth scroll at booth 12, small, red-sealed, plain in the way that dangerous things sometimes are, and directed toward one of the dozens of gates ringing the forest's perimeter. Naruto turned the scroll over in his hands, memorizing the seal, the weight of it, the way his fingers itched to open it just to see what was inside. Don't, Sakura said, watching him. I wasn't gonna. You were absolutely gonna. Was not. Sasuke exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh, but close enough that Naruto shot him a glare anyway. They lined up at Gate 12 alongside dozens of other teams, all of them fanned out around the fence line like predators waiting for a starting gun. Naruto could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to chew on. Genin from Suna in their tan, wind-worn cloaks. A trio from Kusa keeping to themselves, faces mostly hidden. A boy with silver hair and glasses adjusting them with a small, unreadable smile. Kabuto, Naruto vaguely remembered from the written exam, though he didn't think much of him beyond that. Kakashi had shown up briefly before the gates opened. One visible eye crinkled in something like amusement, one hand raised in a lazy wave. "Try not to die," he'd said, which Naruto was fairly sure was supposed to be encouraging, in the specific way that only Kakashi-sensei could manage to make "try not to die" sound like a pep talk. "That's it? That's your big speech?" Naruto had demanded. "You'll be fine," Kakashi said, already turning to leave, one hand lifted in a lazy farewell. "You've got each other. You've got each other." Naruto would think about that sentence a lot later. He didn't know it yet. Right now, it was just something a lazy jonin said before disappearing in a puff of smoke, off to do whatever jonin did while their genin walked into a forest that ate people. The horn sounded. The gates opened. And Team 7 ran into the forest of death together, 3 sets of footsteps pounding through underbrush, 3 shadows moving as one unit through the dark. For the last time in a very long while. Here's the thing about the forest of death that doesn't come across from outside the fence. It doesn't just look dangerous. It sounds dangerous. Every step in, the noise changed. Birds that didn't sound like any bird Naruto recognized, something large moving through underbrush 100 yards off, a low animal sound that could have been a growl or could have been the wind finding a gap in the canopy just right. The light dimmed fast, greenish and filtered, like being underwater in a lake full of poison. "Stay close," Sasuke said low as they moved deeper. "We need higher ground. Get a look at the terrain before we commit to a direction." "Since when do you give orders?" Naruto grumbled, but he followed anyway, because, annoyingly, Sasuke's plan was a good one. They found a rise about a half-mile in, a rocky outcrop tangled in roots that gave them a partial view over the canopy in one direction. Sakura pulled out a rough map they'd sketched from the proctor's briefing, tracing possible routes toward the tower with her finger while Sasuke scanned the horizon and Naruto kept watch on their backs. Because someone had to, and apparently that someone was him today. "Tower's roughly northeast," Sakura said. "If we move steady and don't run into trouble, we could make it in a day and a half. 2 if we're careful." "We're not gonna not run into trouble," Naruto pointed out. "It's the forest of death, Sakura-chan. It's right there in the name." "Thank you for that incredibly helpful observation," Sasuke said dryly. "I'm just saying." "He's not wrong," Sakura admitted, folding the map away. "We should move. Standing still this long is asking for it." They moved. And for a while, a good, solid while, it actually went fine. That's the part that never gets emphasized enough when people tell this story afterward. It worked for a bit. Team 7 moved through the undergrowth and practiced formation, Sasuke scouting ahead through the branches, Sakura tracking their surroundings for genjutsu and ambush signs, Naruto anchoring the rear and occasionally getting yelled at for stepping on dry branches too loudly. It was almost starting to feel normal. And then the ground opened up. Nobody saw the trap because it wasn't a trap, not really, not in the sense of something set by another team, or lurking in wait. It was just the forest being exactly what it was, old, unstable, riddled with hollow spaces beneath the root systems where erosion and time had eaten away at the earth until it was barely holding itself together. Team 7 crossed the stretch of ground that looked as solid as anywhere else they'd walked. It wasn't. The first sign was a sound, a deep, groaning crack, like something enormous shifting its weight underground. Sasuke froze mid-step. Sakura's head snapped toward the noise. Naruto, 3 paces behind them both, felt the earth shudder beneath his sandals a half-second before it gave way entirely. "Move," Sasuke started, but the ground was already gone. What happened next took maybe 4 seconds, though it would replay in Naruto's memory 100 times slower than that. The rise they'd been crossing collapsed into a sinkhole that hadn't existed a moment before, a jagged wound opening in the forest floor and swallowing everything on it, dirt, roots, loose stone, and 3 genin who hadn't had time to do anything but react on pure instinct. Sasuke grabbed a root as the ground dropped, hauling himself sideways onto stable earth with the kind of reflexes that came from actual training and not just luck. Sakura screamed, one sharp, cut-off sound, before Sasuke's other hand caught her wrist and yanked her toward him, both of them scrambling backward onto solid ground as the sinkhole widened. Naruto wasn't so lucky. He'd been a half step behind, on the part of the ground that gave first and gave worst. There was no root to grab, no hand reaching for him fast enough. 1 second he was running. The next, the world tilted sideways and down, dirt and stone and root systems raining past him as he fell into a darkness that swallowed the last thing he saw, Sasuke's face, wide-eyed, mouth forming his name, and turned it into nothing at all. You know how, in every version of this story you've ever heard, Naruto's the guy who never has to face the hard stuff completely alone. Sasuke's always got his back with the Sharingan. Sakura's always there catching what he misses. Except right now, somewhere underneath the forest of death, in the dark, with the sound of his own team's voices getting farther and farther away above him, that safety net is gone. Let's find out what he does without it. Naruto woke up to darkness, dirt in his mouth, and a pain radiating from his left shoulder sharp enough to make him gasp before he even fully understood where he was. For a long moment, he just lay there, blinking up at absolutely nothing, trying to make his brain cooperate. The last clear memory he had was the ground disappearing under his feet and Sasuke's face, and then nothing. A drop. Impact. Dark. Ow, he said out loud, mostly to confirm he still could. His voice came out smaller than he meant it to, swallowed almost instantly by whatever space he was in. Okay, that sucked. He pushed himself up slowly, wincing at the protest from his shoulder, and took stock. He was in some kind of underground hollow, not a cave exactly, more like a pocket where root systems and collapsed earth had created an open space beneath the forest floor. A thin shaft of grayish light filtered down from somewhere above, just enough to make out shapes without actually illuminating much of anything. Sasuke? He called, tilting his head back toward the light. Sakura-chan? Nothing. Guys? This isn't funny. Still nothing. Not even an echo, really. The space swallowed sound almost as thoroughly as it swallowed light. Naruto felt his stomach twist into something cold and unfamiliar. He was used to being alone in plenty of ways, used to empty apartments and quiet nights and the particular silence of nobody waiting for him to come home. But this was a different kind of alone, and it took him a second to place why it felt so much worse. Because usually, even in the emptiest moments, he knew where his precious people were. He knew Iruka-sensei was somewhere teaching a class. He knew Sasuke was somewhere being broody and difficult. He knew Sakura was somewhere being brilliant and a little terrifying. Right now, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he genuinely had no idea. He checked himself for injuries. Bruised shoulder, a scrape along his forearm, nothing broken as far as he could tell, which felt like the first bit of good luck he'd had all day. His pack was still on his back, thankfully, though half its contents had scattered somewhere in the fall. He checked his weapons pouch. Still there. He checked for the scroll. His stomach dropped straight through the floor. The Earth Scroll, the one Sakura had been carrying, tucked securely in her own pack the way they'd agreed, because out of the three of them she was the least likely to lose it in a fight, was not with him, obviously. Because Sakura had it. Because Sakura was somewhere up on solid ground, probably right now, with Sasuke, looking for a way down to him. Naruto took a breath. Then another. He was not going to panic. Panicking wouldn't fix his shoulder or find his teammates, or get him out of a hole in the ground. Panicking had never solved a single problem in his entire life, and he wasn't about to start now, alone, underground, in the single most dangerous training ground in the land of fire. Okay, he said out loud again, just to hear something other than silence. Okay. Think, Naruto. Think. He scanned the hollow more carefully now that his eyes had adjusted. The shaft of light came from what looked like a partial collapse point maybe 15 feet up, not a straight climb, but not impossible either, with enough handholds in the exposed roots and packed earth. The space itself stretched further than he'd first thought, disappearing into darker tunnels in at least 2 directions, remnants of some larger root system or old animal burrow network that had been carved out long before anyone put up a fence around this place. 15 feet up. Loose dirt. One good shoulder. Not great odds. But not impossible ones either. Naruto formed a hand seal, clumsy with his left arm protesting every movement, and focused. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 3 clones popped into existence around him in puffs of smoke, immediately looking as disoriented as he felt. Okay, focus up, Naruto told them, and it was strange, genuinely strange, how much steadier his voice sounded talking to himself than it had a minute ago talking to no one. We're gonna get out of here. 2 of you, brace against the wall there, form a step. I'll climb. Last one, keep watch on those tunnels. I don't like how dark they look. You got it, boss, the clones said in unison, because agreeing with himself was the one argument Naruto never lost. It took 4 attempts, 2 clones dispelling from bad footing, a scraped elbow, and one extremely undignified moment where Naruto nearly went sliding straight back down into the pit before catching a root with his good arm. But eventually, breathing hard and covered in more dirt than he'd been an hour ago, Naruto hauled himself up over the lip of the sinkhole and back onto solid, blessed ground. The forest around him looked exactly like the forest he remembered falling out of, dense, dim, alive with sound in every direction, except now it was unmistakably, achingly empty of the 2 people he'd been walking through it with an hour before. Sasuke! He shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. Sakura-chan! Birds scattered from somewhere in the canopy. Something large moved through brush a good distance off, startled by the noise. Otherwise, nothing. No answering shout. No familiar chakra signature close enough to sense. Nothing but forest, stretching in every direction, indifferent to the fact that a 14-year-old genin was standing in the middle of it, scrollless, alone, and slowly starting to understand exactly how much trouble he was in. Here's a question for you. What do you do when the plan falls apart before it even really started? Because that's exactly where Naruto is right now. No team. No scroll. No idea which direction is which, in a forest specifically designed to make sure genin who wander in alone don't wander back out. If this were you, what would you do first? Drop a comment and let me know. I want to see how many of you would have made the same call Naruto's about to make. But first, let's watch him figure it out. Naruto sat down hard on a fallen log, dirt-streaked and breathing unevenly, and made himself think. Panic wasn't an option. He'd already decided that. But strategy was something he could work with, even if strategy had never exactly been his strongest event back at the academy. He thought about what Iruka-sensei used to say, about what Kakashi-sensei drilled into them during training. He thought, weirdly, about Kurama, dormant somewhere behind his navel, silent for now but never really gone. Okay. Facts. What do I actually know? Fact 1. He was alone. No Sasuke, no Sakura, and until he found them again, no way to complete the exam as a team, because that's how it worked, wasn't it? Team survival, team scroll requirement. If he genuinely couldn't find them, none of them passed. That thought alone was enough to put a hard, cold edge under everything else he was feeling. This wasn't just about him being lost. This was about failing Sasuke and Sakura before the exam had even properly started. Not happening, Naruto thought, jaw setting. Not an option. Fact 2. He had no scroll. Which meant even if, by some miracle, he found his teammates in a forest the size of a small country, they'd still need to secure a heaven scroll to match the earth scroll Sakura carried. Assuming Sakura still had the earth scroll. Assuming she hadn't lost it in whatever chaos had followed his fall. Assuming 100 things he had no way of confirming from where he sat. Fact 3. And this was the one that actually mattered most. The one Naruto turned over and over as he sat there catching his breath. He had absolutely no idea which direction anything was. The fall had disoriented him completely. He didn't know if he'd been carried underground toward the tower or away from it. He didn't know how far the sinkhole had shifted him from where Sasuke and Sakura had last stood. For all he knew, he could start walking in exactly the wrong direction and put himself another mile further from his team with every step. He thought about staying put. Waiting near the sinkhole, in case Sasuke and Sakura circled back looking for him. He thought about it for exactly as long as it took him to remember Anko's voice at the gate. cheerfully informing them that the forest was full of large predators who treated stationary genin as an invitation to lunch. Okay. Not staying put either. Naruto stood, wincing as his shoulder reminded him it existed, and looked up at what little sky was visible through the canopy far overhead. Sun position, that was something, wasn't it? Something Iruka-sensei had actually managed to drill into his thick skull once, years ago, on some academy survival lesson Naruto had mostly slept through except for the parts that stuck despite himself. He squinted at the pale smear of light filtering down, and made his best guess at direction, then compared it against the rough mental map Sakura had sketched back at their first stop, tower northeast, roughly. If he'd fallen more or less straight down and the forest hadn't shifted him too far sideways, northeast should still be northeast. It wasn't a great plan. It was barely a plan at all, honestly. More of an educated guess wrapped around a hope. But it was something, and something was better than sitting on a log feeling sorry for himself, while the lights slowly started dying overhead. All right, Naruto said, mostly to himself, mostly to keep his voice from shaking. All right. Northeast. Find the others, or find the tower, or, he exhaled hard, rolling his aching shoulder, forcing his spine straight. Or figure it out as I go. Same as always, he thought, and something about repeating it steadied him more than he expected. He'd never had it easy. Not at the academy, not in the village, not anywhere. He'd learned a long time ago that waiting for things to be fair, or easy, or convenient, was a great way to spend your whole life waiting. You worked with what you had. You figured it out. He just usually figured it out with Sasuke rolling his eyes at him and Sakura yelling at both of them for being idiots. Doing it without that particular soundtrack felt strange in a way he didn't have a word for yet. Naruto checked his gear one final time. Kunai pouch, secured, shuriken, present though scattered loose from the fall, the last of his ration bars, thankfully intact, and started walking, keeping the pale smear of northeastish sunlight at his back left the way he'd worked out, moving as quietly as someone built like a small, determined storm cloud was capable of moving. The first hour passed without incident, which honestly felt like more of a small miracle than Naruto wanted to admit. He kept his pace steady, ears straining for any sound that wasn't the forest's normal ambient chaos. Birds, wind, the occasional distant crash of something large moving through undergrowth that he made an active point of moving away from rather than toward. He tried calling out for Sasuke and Sakura twice more in that first hour, cupping his hands and shouting their names into the green dimness, and both times the silence that answered him felt a little heavier than the last. By the third attempt he stopped. Partly because he was starting to worry the noise would draw the wrong kind of attention, partly because some small, honest part of him didn't want to keep hearing nothing answer back. They're fine, he told himself, more than once, with the particular fierce insistence of someone trying to convince himself of something he badly wanted to be true. Sasuke caught Sakura before the ground went. I saw him do it. They're together. They're fine. They're probably looking for me right now. It was probably true. It was almost certainly true, if he was being honest with the parts of his memory that had actually processed those last few seconds before he fell. But probably and almost certainly were doing a lot of heavy lifting in a forest that had already proven it didn't much care about anybody's plans. Around the second hour, things stopped being quiet. Naruto heard it before he saw it. A rustle of movement too rhythmic, too deliberate to be wind or wildlife. He froze mid-step, dropping instinctively into the low crouch Kakashi had drilled into all of them during training, chakra pulling tight and controlled instead of the loud, sloppy spikes he usually let leak out without thinking. Someone's here. Through a gap in the underbrush, he caught sight of movement, 3 figures, moving in loose formation through the trees maybe 40 feet off, headbands marking them as a team from a village Naruto didn't immediately recognize, moving with the kind of coordinated quiet that told him they were far more comfortable in this forest than he currently was. Another team. His mind raced through the implications fast. Another team meant possibly another scroll. It also meant 3 genin who very likely wouldn't think twice about attacking a lone, obviously separated genin who looked like easy pickings. Easy pickings. The phrase needled at something in Naruto's chest. Something stubborn and prideful that had been needled at his whole life and had gotten very, very good at pushing back. He had 2 real options, and he knew it. Option 1, Stay hidden, let them pass, keep moving toward the tower and hope he crossed paths with Sasuke and Sakura before he crossed paths with anyone hostile. The smart option. The safe option. Option 2. Naruto's eyes tracked to the pack the lead genin was carrying, the telltale outline of a scroll case clipped to his belt. A scroll. He didn't know yet if it was heaven or earth. He didn't know if it would even matter, not without Sasuke and Sakura at his side to make the pass complete. But some instinct, the same one that had kept him alive through years of being underestimated, overlooked, and left to figure things out entirely on his own, told him that securing a scroll now, whatever it turned out to be, was better than walking into the tower later with nothing at all. Sasuke and Sakura have the Earth Scroll, he reasoned, crouched low, heart hammering. If I can grab a Heaven Scroll, if I can find them and we've got both, we still pass. We still make it. I'm not gonna be the reason we failed this exam. It was, in retrospect, an enormous gamble built on a chain of assumptions that could very easily collapse the same way that sinkhole had. But Naruto Uzumaki had never once in his life let the size of a gamble stop him from taking it, and he wasn't about to start in the one moment where the stakes had never been higher. He watched the three genin move, memorizing their formation, their spacing, the way the one carrying the scroll walked slightly behind the other two, half-shielded, cautious, but not cautious enough. Not cautious enough for someone who'd spent years learning exactly how to be underestimated. Naruto's hands came together in a familiar seal, chakra gathering, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across a face still streaked with dirt from a fall that should have left him rattled and hiding. Instead, it had left him something else entirely. Something the forest of death was about to get its first real look at. All right, he murmured, so quiet even the birds didn't stir. Let's see what I can do without anybody watching my back. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Smoke bloomed silently around him, and where one genin had crouched in the underbrush a heartbeat ago, there were suddenly 6. The team moving through the underbrush belonged to Takigakure. Naruto could tell from the headbands, a stylized waterfall symbol catching what little light made it through the canopy. 3 genin, moving in a loose triangle formation that spoke of actual training, actual teamwork. Actual coordination between people who'd clearly spent more time drilling together than Team 7 had managed in weeks. The one in front was tall and rangy, moving with the kind of loose-limbed confidence that usually meant taijutsu specialist. Naruto clocked the wrapped forearms, the stance that stayed low and ready even while walking. Call him lead guy for now, because Naruto sure wasn't sticking around to ask names. Behind him and slightly to the left walked a girl with dark hair cropped short and practical, dressed the way anyone with sense dressed for a forest full of things that wanted to bite you. Long sleeves, sturdy pants, a high collar that left nothing exposed to the underbrush's thorns or worse. She moved with her hands loose near a set of samban at her hip, eyes constantly scanning, the kind of alert that came from being the one who noticed things before they became problems. And bringing up the rear, half shielded by the other two, deliberately, Naruto noted, which told him plenty about how this team operated, was the one carrying the scroll case clipped to his belt. Shorter, stockier, moving with the particular caution of someone who knew he was carrying the thing everyone else in this forest wanted. 3-on-1, Naruto thought, watching them move closer through the gap in the brush. Well, 3-on-6 technically. Let's see how much that math actually helps them. He held his breath and let his clones fan out, low and silent, circling wide through the underbrush while the original stayed put, waiting for the moment the team's formation would carry them directly between 2 of his hidden clones. Patience wasn't usually Naruto's strong suit. Ask literally anyone who'd ever tried to teach him anything. But something about being completely alone in a forest that wanted him dead had a way of sharpening a person's focus real fast. The Taki team drew closer. 15 feet. 10. Now. Naruto didn't shout his usual battle cry, didn't announce himself the way he normally would, all bluster and confidence and hey, look at me. Instead, 2 clones dropped from the branches above in dead silence, kunai already drawn, aiming to separate the scroll carrier from his teammates before anyone had a chance to react. It almost worked. Almost. The girl's head snapped up a half-second before the clones landed, some combination of instinct and training catching the shift in air pressure. The faint rustle of leaves that shouldn't have rustled, and she was already moving, Saban flashing from her fingers toward the fallen clones even as she shouted a warning to her teammates. Ambush! One clone took a Saban through the shoulder and dispelled in a puff of smoke before it even landed. The other made contact, kunai catching the scroll carrier's arm hard enough to draw a hiss of pain. But the lead guy was already spinning into the fight, a fist catching the clone square in the chest and dispelling it on impact. Okay. Not as easy as I hoped. Naruto, still hidden in the brush with his remaining 3 clones, felt something settle in his chest that wasn't quite panic, and wasn't quite excitement either, something new, something that felt a lot like the particular clarity that showed up right before things got very serious. There's more of them. The girl called, Saban already reloaded between her fingers, eyes sweeping the tree line with sharp, professional focus. Kenji, protect the scroll. Daisuke, flank left. Kenji. Daisuke. Naruto filed the names away without really meaning to. Some part of him that had spent years memorizing everyone else's names while half the village couldn't be bothered to learn his automatically cataloging the enemy. The one called Daisuke, lead guy, was already moving, fast and low, cutting through the underbrush toward where Naruto's remaining clones had scattered. He fought like someone who'd trained specifically for forest combat, using the trees and roots as much as his own limbs, closing distance with a speed that caught one of Naruto's clones flat-footed and ended it with a single, brutal palm strike. 2 clones left. This is not going the way I pictured it. Naruto abandoned the hidden approach, because clearly stealth had a shelf life measured in seconds against a team this coordinated, and threw himself into the fight properly, kunai in hand, chakra already building for another clone or 3 the second he had breathing room to make them. Hey! He shouted, because apparently some habits died hard even mid-crisis. Over here, unless you're scared. It wasn't the most tactically sound thing he could have said. It was, however, extremely effective at getting Daisuke's attention, which pulled the Taki Genin's focus away from Naruto's last clone just long enough for that clone to land a solid kick that sent Daisuke stumbling into a tangle of roots. Small victories. The girl, Mei, though Naruto wouldn't learn her name until later, and honestly wouldn't have particularly cared if he had, pivoted fast, Saban flashing toward Naruto's exposed side. He twisted, felt one graze his ribs hot and sharp, and returned fire with a kunai that she deflected without much visible effort. She's fast. Faster than me, probably. Definitely more trained. This was the part of the fight where, normally, Sasuke would have been somewhere doing something with fire jutsu that evened the odds dramatically, or Sakura would have spotted an opening Naruto was too busy getting hit to notice. Neither of those things was happening. It was just Naruto, one increasingly battered clone, and his own 2 hands against 2 genin who very clearly knew what they were doing. So make more hands, something stubborn in the back of his mind pointed out, and honestly, that was about as close to a strategic epiphany as Naruto tended to get mid-fight. His hand snapped into the seal, chakra flooding out in a rush he didn't bother trying to control, and this time he didn't make 3 clones or 5. He made a dozen, flooding the small clearing with identical orange-clad genin in a burst of smoke that made Mei's eyes go wide and Daisuke, just picking himself up off the ground, swear loudly enough that Naruto, the real one, buried somewhere in the crowd of his own duplicates, actually grinned. This is more like it. Now quick pause, because I need you to appreciate what just happened here. Naruto didn't win that opening exchange. Not even close. He got outmaneuvered by a coordinated team that trains together, that reads each other's movements, that's had months to build the kind of trust and rhythm his own teams barely started developing. If this were a straight 1-on-2 fight, he loses. Probably badly. But here's the thing about facing someone alone in a fight like this. They don't have a teammate to fall back on either. Not against this many targets at once. And Naruto's about to remind them exactly why an army of one particularly stubborn genin is a genuinely terrifying thing to be on the wrong end of. Let's watch him close this out. 12 Narutos descending on a clearing all at once is, by most accounts, an overwhelming thing to deal with, even for a coordinated 2-person defense. Mei and Daisuke fought back-to-back on instinct, Saban and Taijutsu carving through clone after clone in bursts of smoke. But for every clone that dispelled, another was already closing from a different angle, and the sheer number of directions they had to defend against started to fray even good training at the seams. There's too many! Daisuke shouted, ducking under a kunai strike and driving an elbow into the clone that threw it, dispelling it on contact but immediately catching a follow-up kick from the clone directly behind. Kenji, get the scroll out of here now, there it is. Naruto, the real one, though at this point even he was having to work to track which body was actually his amid the chaos, caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. Kenji, the shortest and least combat-focused of the three, breaking away from the fight entirely, scroll case clutched tight, sprinting for the tree line while his teammates bought him the distance to escape. Smart. Really smart, actually. If Naruto had been coordinating a team defense, that's exactly the call he'd have made too: protect the objective, sacrifice position to secure the win condition. It was the kind of tactical thinking Sasuke would have approved of, probably while making some comment about how Naruto never would have thought of it himself. Which, fair. He probably wouldn't have, 6 months ago. Not gonna let it work though. 2 of his clones broke off from the main clash and gave chase, cutting through underbrush at a dead sprint after Kenji's retreating back, while the rest kept Mei and Daisuke fully occupied with a rotating assault that gave neither of them a spare second to notice their scroll carrier was now being actively hunted through the trees. Kenji was fast, faster than Naruto expected from someone built like a wall, but fear does interesting things to a person's decision-making, and in his rush to put distance between himself and the fight, Kenji clipped a root hard enough to stumble, catching himself against a tree trunk for half a second too long. Half a second was all a shadow clone needed. The first clone tackled him bodily, both of them going down in a tangle of limbs and forest debris, while the second peeled the scroll case free of Kenji's belt with the kind of clean, practice motion that Naruto himself definitely couldn't have pulled off. Some benefit, apparently, of the clones sharing memory and skill with each other in the heat of a fight, learning and adjusting in real time in a way Naruto was only distantly aware was happening. Ichiwai, give that back! Kenji shouted, thrashing against the clone pinning him, but the clone holding the scroll was already gone, vanishing back into the underbrush toward the main fight, and a half-second later the one pinning Kenji dispelled deliberately, letting the Taki Genin scramble upright with nothing but a torn sleeve and the dawning, horrified realization that his team had just lost the entire point of the exercise. Kenji, what happened? Mei's voice, sharp with panic, cut across the clearing as she caught sight of her teammates stumbling back into view, scrollless and pale. There's more of him than I thought. He took it. He actually. That moment of distraction cost her. One of Naruto's clones caught her across the jaw with a solid right hook while her attention was split, sending her stumbling into Daisuke. And in the half-second of chaos that followed, 3 more clones converged and simply didn't stop. Not with brutal force, not with any real intent to seriously hurt them. Naruto, even mid-fight, even outnumbered and adrenaline drunk, wasn't about to cross that line, but with enough overwhelming, coordinated pressure that within another 20 seconds, both remaining Taki Genin were pinned, breathing hard, very clearly beaten. Silence settled over the clearing except for panting breath and the slow pop-pop-pop of extra clones dispelling themselves now that the fight was over, until only the original Naruto remained, standing in the middle of it all, scroll case held tight in one fist, looking almost as surprised as the Genin he'd just beaten. Huh, he said out loud, mostly to himself. That actually worked. Daisuke, still pinned by a clone that hadn't dispelled yet, glared up at him with the particular fury of someone who'd just been thoroughly outmaneuvered by a guy fighting completely alone. You've gotta be kidding me. One guy did this? Technically like 15 guys, Naruto said, unable to resist the small, satisfied grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. But yeah, one guy. Where's your team? Mei asked, wincing as she pushed herself upright, jaw already starting to bruise. There was something sharp and evaluating in the way she looked at him now. Not hostile exactly, more like she was recalculating something. Nobody fights like that if they've got backup. That whole thing was built for someone working solo. The question landed somewhere it had no business landing, given the situation, and Naruto felt something twist in his chest that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with the 2 names he hadn't said out loud in hours. Sasuke. Sakura-chan. Still out there somewhere. Still looking for him, hopefully. Still, none of your business, Naruto said, sharper than he meant to, and immediately felt a little bad about it. because Mei hadn't really done anything except ask a reasonable question after getting beaten by a stranger's small army. He crouched down to Kenji's level, the clone finally releasing Daisuke as the tension in the clearing settled into something less immediately violent, and held up the stolen scroll case, turning it over in his hands. This an Earth scroll or heaven? Kenji, still rattled, blinked at him. Heaven. Why do you even? Perfect, Naruto said, and meant it more than any of them could have possibly understood. His team had an Earth scroll, assuming Sakura still had it, assuming a dozen things he had absolutely no way to confirm right now, and if he could find them again, if he could just find them, this would complete the set. If. The words sat heavier in his chest than he wanted to admit. He straightened, tucking the scroll case securely into his own pack, and looked at the 3 battered genins sprawled in various states of defeat around the clearing. There was a version of this moment, the version other genin might have played out, where you pressed the advantage, took whatever else was worth taking, made sure a beaten team stayed beaten. Naruto had heard stories, whispered ones, about exams that went that way. About genin who didn't walk out of this forest the same as they walked in, and some who didn't walk out at all. He didn't have it in him. Never really had. You guys can go, he said instead, straightening his jacket, wincing slightly at the Senbon graze along his ribs that was starting to properly sting now that the adrenaline was fading. Not gonna mess with you any more than I already did. Figure the scroll's enough. Daisuke stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're just letting us walk? I mean, yeah? Naruto shrugged, which pulled at the graze on his ribs and made him wince again. You didn't do anything to me except try to survive the exam same as everybody else. No reason to make it worse for you. There was a beat of silence in the clearing, the particular kind of silence that comes after someone does something that doesn't fit the situation, that snags on people's expectations and leaves them scrambling to recalibrate. Mei, still holding her bruised jaw, studied Naruto with an expression that had shifted somewhere from wary to something closer to genuinely curious. You're from Konoha, she said. Not a question. Whiskers, orange jacket, that headband. Everybody knows what Konoha genin look like this year, after the exam roster got posted. You're Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto blinked, caught a little off guard by being recognized. Yeah. So the roster had you down as the weak link on your team, Mei said, matter of fact, not unkind exactly, just stating something she'd apparently read or heard somewhere. Sasuke Uchiha's teammate, Sakura Haruno's teammate. Nobody really mentioned you except as, well, their teammate. Something in Naruto's chest went tight and hot in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with the fight. It wasn't like he hadn't heard some version of that before. Heard it his whole life, actually, in a dozen different phrasings. From a dozen different people who decided who he was before bothering to find out. Usually it stung in a familiar, worn-down way, the kind of hurt that had calloused over from overuse. Today it landed different. Today, alone in a forest with no one to prove otherwise, with a scroll he'd taken entirely on his own tucked into his pack and 3 beaten genin staring at him like they were reconsidering everything they thought they knew, it landed like something closer to fuel. Yeah, well, Naruto said, and something in his voice had shifted too, gone flatter and steadier than the easy bluster he usually led with. Maybe update that roster. He turned and walked back toward the tree line without waiting for a response, leaving 3 battered Takigakure genin sitting in a clearing, processing exactly how badly they'd misjudged the weak link of Team 7. Alright, I need to sit with that for a second, because that's not a small moment. That's the first crack in something. Every version of this story you've ever seen has Naruto fighting to prove himself to somebody, to Sasuke, to the village, to Kakashi-sensei, to Sakura. There's always an audience for his growth, somebody watching, somebody he's trying to impress or catch up to or outlast. Right now, there's nobody watching. Nobody keeping score except him. And he still fought like that, still made the call to let a beaten team walk instead of pressing an advantage nobody would have blamed him for taking. That's not nothing. Keep that in your back pocket, because it's going to matter a lot more before this arc's done. For now, Naruto's got a scroll. He's got a direction, more or less. And he's got no idea that the fight he just won made noise loud enough to catch the attention of something a whole lot worse than 3 genin, from Takigakure. Let's keep moving. The adrenaline crash hit Naruto about 20 minutes after he left the clearing, the way it always did, that specific, bone-deep exhaustion that came after your body finally got the memo that the immediate danger had passed, and it was allowed to feel every single thing it had been ignoring in the moment. His ribs throbbed where the sunban had grazed him. His shoulder, already bruised from the fall that morning, complained loudly every time he raised his arm past shoulder height. He was hungry in the specific, gnawing way that came from burning through chakra reserves faster than his body could replenish them, and the ration bar he dug out of his pack barely made a dent in it. He kept walking anyway, scroll secured, direction roughly maintained, and let his thoughts drift in the particular way they tended to when his body was tired and his guard was down. Update that roster. He meant it when he said it. Meant it with a fierceness that surprised even him a little, in retrospect. But there was a difference between meaning something in the heat of a fight and actually believing it stood a chance of being true, and Naruto had spent enough of his life on the wrong side of that gap to know better than to get too comfortable with the feeling. Still, he'd fought 3 trained genin completely alone and walked away with their scroll and nothing worse than a scraped rib to show for it. That had to count for something. Didn't it? He thought about Sasuke, wondered, not for the first time in the last few hours, whether his teammate was somewhere in this same forest thinking about him, or whether Sasuke had already written the whole situation off as an inconvenience to be dealt with once the exam wrapped up. He thought about Sakura and hoped, hard, with the particular intensity that came from genuinely caring about someone, that she was safe, that Sasuke had gotten her fully clear of the sinkhole, that whatever came next for the two of them didn't involve anything worse than a missing, mildly reckless teammate. He was so deep in that particular spiral of thought that he almost missed the shift in the air around him, a subtle wrongness, a stillness that settled over the forest like something had reached out and pressed a hand flat against the whole clearing, silencing birdsong and wind alike in the space of a single breath. Naruto stopped walking. The forest around him had gone completely, unnaturally quiet. No birds. No rustle of small animals in the underbrush. No wind moving the canopy overhead, even though he could have sworn there'd been a breeze just seconds before. Every hair on the back of his neck stood up at once, some instinct far older and far more animal than anything he'd consciously trained screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. "Hello?" he called out, and hated how small his voice sounded swallowed by that unnatural silence. Nothing answered. Which was somehow worse than if something had. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line, kunai already sliding into his free hand without him fully deciding to draw it. The forest looked exactly the same as it had a minute ago. Same trees, same dim green light, same tangled undergrowth, except now every shadow seemed to hold something it hadn't held before, and the sheer, absolute stillness pressed against him like a physical weight. This isn't right. This isn't. This doesn't feel like an animal. This doesn't even feel like a person. Kurama stirred, somewhere deep behind his navel, a low, wordless rumble of something that in a fox might have been called a growl and in whatever Kurama actually was felt more like a warning, ancient and wary and alert in a way Naruto had rarely felt from the creature caged inside him. What? Naruto thought, directing the question inward, half expecting no response at all, because Kurama mostly ignored him unless things had gone catastrophically sideways. What is it? No answer came in words. But the pressure in the air thickened, and somewhere off through the trees, distant, but not nearly distant enough, Naruto heard it. A low, sibilant hiss, drawn out and deliberate, carrying through the unnatural stillness like something that wanted very badly to be heard. Then silence again. Total, absolute, suffocating silence. Naruto stood frozen in the middle of the clearing, kunai gripped tight in one white-knuckled hand, scroll secured in his pack. Every instinct he possessed screaming at him that whatever had just made that sound was not a genin team, was not one of the forest's ordinary predators, and was very possibly already watching him from somewhere he couldn't see. Sasuke. Sakura-chan. Wherever you are, I really hope you're staying away from whatever that was. The hiss came again, closer this time, low and drawn out, sliding through the dead silent air with a deliberateness that made Naruto's skin crawl in a way no animal noise ever had. He turned slowly, kunai raised, scanning the tree line for any hint of movement, any shift in shadow that might give away where the sound had come from. Nothing. Okay, he muttered under his breath, forcing his voice steady even though his pulse was hammering hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. Okay, that's not creepy at all. Totally fine. Great. Kurama's presence stirred again, deeper and more insistent than before, not words still, but something that felt unmistakably like tension, like a predator recognizing a bigger predator, and not much liking the math involved. What is it? Naruto pressed, directing the thought inward with more urgency this time. Come on, you've gotta know something. What's out there? Silence, from Kurama. Not the usual dismissive silence Naruto had come to expect over the past several months, either. Something heavier, something that felt almost like caution, which was somehow 100 times more unsettling than if the fox had just told him to run. The forest stayed dead quiet for a long, stretched-out moment, long enough that Naruto started to wonder if he'd imagined the whole thing, if exhaustion and hunger and the leftover adrenaline from the fight with the Taki team had just conjured a threat out of nothing. Then the ground in front of him exploded. Naruto threw himself backward on pure reflex, hitting the dirt hard and rolling clear as a massive shape burst up from beneath the forest floor. Not a trap this time, not collapsing earth, but something alive, something enormous, coiling up out of a tunnel that shouldn't have existed a second before. Scales caught the dim green light in a sickly sheen as a snake easily as thick around as Naruto was tall reared up, head swaying, tongue flicking out to taste the air. What the? Naruto scrambled upright, kunai raised, putting a fallen tree between himself and the massive snake's coiled body. That is way too big to be a normal snake, that is way too big. The snake's head swung toward him, dark eyes fixing on his position with unsettling precision, and Naruto had just enough time to think this is going to be a problem before the creature struck. He dove sideways, felt the rush of displaced air as the massive head slammed into the ground where he'd been standing, and came up already forming the seal for a clone, chakra flooding out of him in a rush that felt less controlled and more like pure panic given form. 3 clones popped into existence around him, and for a few frantic seconds it was almost enough, clones scattering to draw the snake's attention in multiple directions while Naruto looked for an opening, for anything that might let him put real distance between himself and a creature that could clearly swallow him whole without much effort. It wasn't a fight he was winning. It wasn't really a fight at all, if he was honest, more like an extended exercise in not dying, clones dispelling in rapid bursts of smoke as the snake's massive body crashed through the clearing, indifferent to the underbrush it tore apart in the process. And then, in the space of a single breath, the snake simply stopped. Its head went rigid, swaying slightly, before it coiled back with an odd, almost deferential motion, the kind of movement that made absolutely no sense for a wild predator to make. Unless it wasn't actually acting on its own instincts at all. That's enough, said a voice, low and smooth and completely unhurried, drifting out from the tree line like it had all the time in the world. You've made your point. He's not what I expected either. Naruto spun toward the voice, kunai raised, heart still hammering from the near miss with the snake, and found himself staring at a man who stepped out of the shadows like the shadows themselves had simply decided to let him through. Pale skin. Dark hair pulled back loose. Eyes with a sickly yellow cast that made something ancient and instinctual in the back of Naruto's brain scream wrong, wrong, get away before his conscious mind had even finished processing the rest of the man's appearance. He wore simple, dark robes, unremarkable in cut, and moved with a fluid, unbothered grace that made the massive snake behind him look almost tame by comparison. Who are you? Naruto demanded, backing up a step even as he kept his kunai raised, every instinct screaming that this was not a fight he had any business winning. The man's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, too sharp at the edges, too knowing. You'll find out soon enough. What matters right now is that I felt your chakra flare rather spectacularly a little while ago. Impressive work, for someone fighting entirely alone. His gaze flicked briefly, almost lazily, toward the direction of the sinkhole Naruto had climbed out of hours earlier. Separated from your team, are we? How unfortunate. Naruto's stomach dropped. You know I'm alone? I know a great many things, the man said, taking a slow, unhurried step closer, and Naruto found himself backing up to match it without consciously deciding to. I know, for instance, that you carry something extraordinarily interesting inside you. Something I felt the moment your chakra spiked loud enough to reach me from half a mile away. Kurama's presence surged, hard and sudden, a wave of raw, animal fury that hit Naruto's mindscape like a physical blow, and for the first time since the seal had first flickered into his awareness months ago, the fox's voice cut through clear and unmistakable. Orochimaru. The word came out of Kurama like a snarl, dripping with something that sounded uncomfortably like hatred layered over something else, something that, if Naruto hadn't known better, he might have called wariness. Kid, this one is not like the others you fought. Get out. Now, that's Orochimaru? Naruto's blood went cold. He'd heard the name in passing, from Iruka-sensei, in a hushed, careful tone, from overheard conversations between Jonin that cut off the second they noticed a genin listening. Sannin. Missing Nin? The kind of name that made grown, battle-hardened shinobi lower their voices. Ah, Orochimaru said, and something in his expression sharpened with genuine, unsettling interest, watching the way Naruto's face had gone pale. So the fox recognizes me. That's rather fascinating. I wasn't expecting quite that reaction. Get away from me, Naruto said, and was almost proud of how steady his voice came out, given that every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run and never stop. No, I don't think I will, Orochimaru said, almost conversationally, closing another slow step of distance. You see, I came to this forest for someone else entirely, a boy with rather more famous eyes than yours. But you've become considerably more interesting in the last few minutes than I expected, little genin, and I do so hate to leave interesting things unexamined. Okay. I need everyone watching this to understand exactly what's happening right now, because this is the single biggest divergence this whole story is built around. In the actual Chūnin Exams, Orochimaru barely glances at Naruto. He's got one target, one obsession, and it's not the loud kid in the orange jacket. Naruto gets a passing sneer and nothing more. Right now, Orochimaru just heard a chakra signature powerful enough to level a coordinated 3-genin team completely alone. Felt something ancient and furious answer back from inside that same genin the second he got close, and decided, on the spot, that this was worth his personal attention. That's not a small shift. That's the whole story changing shape in real time. Let's see if Naruto survives finding that out. Naruto didn't wait to see what came next. He threw himself sideways, hands already moving through the seal, chakra flooding out in a burst that produced not 3 clones this time, not even a dozen, but every single one he could manage on the exhausted, adrenaline-burned dregs of his reserves. Nearly 20 identical shouts of shadow clone jutsu. Cracking through the clearing in a wall of orange and smoke. It didn't matter. Orochimaru moved through the swarm of clones like they were barely an inconvenience, one hand catching a kunai strike and redirecting it with almost bored efficiency, a foot sweeping through 3 clones at once and dispelling them in a single fluid motion that looked less like combat, and more like a man swatting away flies that had gotten mildly too close. You're strong for your age, Orochimaru observed, almost pleasantly, as another wave of clones dissolved around him without landing a single meaningful hit. Genuinely strong. That fox's chakra runs deeper in you than I expected, deeper than it should, this early. Someone's been shaping you, whether you realize it or not. Shut up! Naruto shouted, the last of his clones dispelling around him as he threw himself into the fight directly, kunai flashing, and it was, he understood with a sick, sinking clarity, like fighting the ocean. Every strike he threw was red before it landed. Every angle he tried closed off before he'd fully committed to it. This wasn't a fight. This was a demonstration of exactly how far outmatched he was, and Orochimaru seemed to be enjoying every second of proving it. A hand closed around Naruto's wrist mid-strike, impossibly fast, impossibly strong, and wrenched, hard enough that Naruto's kunai clattered to the forest floor and a sound halfway between a gasp and a scream tore out of his throat as something in his shoulder ground wrong. There we are, Orochimaru said softly, leaning down slightly, yellow eyes fixed on Naruto's face with an intensity that made every hair on the back of his neck stand up. Let's see exactly what you're carrying, shall we? Chakra, cold, invasive, utterly wrong, pressed against the edges of Naruto's mind and the seal at his navel simultaneously, probing, testing, searching for something with a precision that made Naruto's stomach turn even through the haze of pain radiating from his wrenched shoulder. He could feel Kurama's fury spike behind the seal, a wall of raw, protective rage slamming down against the intrusion with a force that made Orochimaru's expression flicker, just for a second, with something that might have been surprise. And oh, Kurama snarled, the word reverberating through Naruto's skull with a force that nearly blacked him out on its own. You will not touch what is mine, Snake. The chakra pressure recoiled sharply, and Orochimaru actually took a half-step back, his easy, unbothered composure cracking for the first time since he'd stepped out of the shadows. Something crossed his expression, not fear, exactly. Naruto didn't think this man was capable of fear in any ordinary sense, but something adjacent to it. Recalculation? Genuine surprise. Interesting, Orochimaru murmured, releasing Naruto's wrist and stepping back fully, watching him with new, sharper focus. Very interesting. That's not a typical seal response. That's not typical at all. Naruto stumbled backward, clutching his throbbing wrist to his chest, breathing hard, blinking against spots of white creeping into the edges of his vision. What did you just? I was testing something, Orochimaru said, and the pleasant, conversational tone had shifted into something colder, more clinical, the voice of someone examining a specimen rather than fighting an opponent. I came here today intending to leave a particular mark on a particular Uchiha. I find myself reconsidering that plan. The words hit Naruto like a physical blow, colder even than the wrenched shoulder, or the invasive press of chakra against his seal. You're after Sasuke. I was, Orochimaru said, tilting his head slightly, studying Naruto's reaction with open, unsettling curiosity. Tell me, how would you feel, little genin, if I told you I might change my mind? If I told you that whatever sealed inside you might prove considerably more worth my attention than a boy with famous eyes and rather more ordinary chakra? You stay away from him, Naruto snarled, forcing himself upright despite the pain screaming through his shoulder. Despite every rational part of his brain telling him this was a fight he had absolutely no business trying to continue. You stay away from both of them, you hear me? I don't care what you do to me, but you leave Sasuke and Sakura-chan alone. Something shifted in Orochimaru's expression at that, a flicker of genuine, almost startled interest that hadn't been there a moment before, gone as quickly as it appeared, buried back under that same unbothered, clinical calm. How touching, he said, and there was an edge to it now that hadn't been present before, something that might have been mockery or might have been something closer to genuine reassessment. The dead last genin, alone, injured, hopelessly outmatched, and his very first instinct is to bargain away his own safety for teammates who aren't even here to see it. A slow, considering pause. Tell me, do they know that's the kind of person you are? Or do they only see the loud, foolish mask you wear for them? The question landed somewhere ugly and old in Naruto's chest, somewhere that had spent years absorbing exactly that kind of dismissal from a village that had decided who he was before he'd had a chance to prove otherwise. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, standing alone in a clearing against an opponent who could kill him without visible effort, something in Naruto just went hard and cold and furious instead. They know exactly who I am, Naruto said, low and steady, meeting those unsettling yellow eyes without flinching. Better than you ever will. I want you to sit with that exchange for a second, because it matters more than the fight itself does. Orochimaru's not just testing Naruto's chakra here. He's testing him, poking at every insecurity a lifetime of being overlooked would have built up, expecting it to crack something open. It doesn't. And that, right there, is the first real sign that whatever's about to happen next isn't going to play out the way Orochimaru expects it to. Doesn't mean Naruto wins this fight, though. Let's be real clear about that. He is nowhere close to strong enough to survive a Sannin at full attention, and what happens next is going to prove that in the ugliest way possible. Orochimaru moved again, faster this time, no more testing, no more idle conversation, and Naruto barely had time to raise his arms before a strike caught him full in the chest and sent him crashing backward, through a stand of underbrush hard enough to knock every scrap of air from his lungs. He hit the ground and rolled, gasping, vision swimming, every instinct screaming at him to get up, to move, to do something even as his body seemed to have collectively decided that lying still was a much more reasonable plan. He forced himself upright anyway, blood trickling warm from a split lip, and found Orochimaru standing exactly where he'd been a moment before, watching with that same unhurried, clinical patience. You have remarkable resilience, Orochimaru observed, almost approvingly, as Naruto spat blood and forced himself back to his feet on legs that didn't entirely want to cooperate. The fox's chakra, I imagine. It would take considerably more than that to keep an ordinary genin standing at this point. I'm not done, Naruto managed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, forcing his stance back into something that vaguely resembled ready. No, Orochimaru agreed, something almost fond creeping into his voice, the way a collector might speak of a particularly stubborn specimen. You're really not, are you? Fascinating. He came at Naruto again, and this time there was no restraint in it at all, no testing, no probing curiosity, just brutal, overwhelming force delivered with the casual efficiency of someone who'd stopped centuries of opponents from ever getting back up. Naruto tried to dodge, tried to bring his arms up to block, and succeeded at neither, catching a strike across the ribs that sent white-hot pain lancing through his whole side and dropped him hard onto one knee. Kit, Kurama's voice cut through the haze of pain, low and urgent in a way Naruto had genuinely never heard from the fox before. You cannot win this. Do you understand me? This is not a fight you survive through stubbornness alone. Then what do I do? Naruto thought back, desperate, forcing himself upright again through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to stay down. I can't just let him. Then buy time, Kurama snarled. Run. Hide. Do whatever it takes to still be breathing when this ends, because I promise you, boy, dead heroes accomplish nothing. It wasn't advice Naruto particularly wanted to hear. Every instinct screaming through him wanted to keep fighting, wanted to prove, to himself, to Orochimaru, to some imagined audience that didn't exist in this empty forest, that he wasn't the kind of person who ran from a fight, no matter how hopeless. But some small, exhausted, clear-headed part of him recognized the truth in Kurama's words even through the pain and adrenaline. This wasn't a fight. This was a slow, methodical demonstration of exactly how outmatched he was, and continuing to stand and swing was only going to end one way. Naruto forced his hands into the seal one final time, chakra scraped from reserves that were dangerously close to empty, and threw everything he had left into a single, desperate burst, not an attack, but a diversion, a dozen clones exploding into existence around the clearing simultaneously, filling the air with smoke and chaos and just enough confusion for one battered, bleeding genin to throw himself sideways into the underbrush and run. He didn't get far. A hand closed around the back of his jacket before he'd made it 20 feet, hauling him off his feet and slamming him back against the trunk of a tree hard enough to force every bit of air from his lungs in a single, ragged gasp. Orochimaru's face swam into view, close now, that same clinical, considering expression fixed on Naruto's own as he struggled uselessly against a grip that felt less like flesh and more like iron. Running, Orochimaru said, almost thoughtfully, is not typically how these encounters go for me. I'll let go, Naruto managed, though it came out weaker than he wanted, barely more than a whisper against the pressure crushing his chest. I don't think I will. Not yet. Orochimaru's expression shifted, something calculating settling into those yellow eyes as he studied Naruto's face with the kind of focus that made Naruto's skin crawl worse than the pain did. I find myself facing an interesting choice, little genin. I could mark you, right now, the same way I intended for your Uchiha teammate. Watch what grows from planting that particular seed in soil already this fertile. A pause, considering. Or I could simply take what's sealed inside you directly, and save myself the weight entirely. Kurama's fury exploded behind the seal, a wave of raw, protective rage that Naruto felt as much as heard, chakra flooding through his chagrined, exhausted body in a burst that had nothing to do with his own conscious control and everything to do with something ancient and furious refusing, point blank, to let either option happen without a fight. The surge caught Orochimaru visibly off guard, his grip loosened by a fraction, just enough, as reddish chakra licked up around Naruto's skin in thin, hissing tendrils, the seal at his stomach glowing faint and hot through the fabric of his jacket. Orochimaru breathed, something almost delighted crossing his features even as he took an involuntary step back, releasing Naruto entirely as the chakra pressure spiked sharper, hotter, more openly hostile than anything he'd felt from the boy before this moment. There it is. Naruto hit the ground hard, gasping, the chakra receding as quickly as it had surged, leaving him drained and shaking and barely conscious on the forest floor, but alive, critically, desperately alive, in a way that felt more like Kurama's doing than his own. Orochimaru stood over him for a long moment, studying the boy crumpled at his feet with an expression that had shifted entirely from the clinical curiosity of before into something far more focused, far more decided. "I think," he said slowly, almost to himself, "that I've changed my plans rather significantly." He crouched down, one cool hand tilting Naruto's chin up despite the boy's weak, uncoordinated attempt to pull away, examining his face with unsettling thoroughness. "I won't mark you today," Orochimaru said, and something in his tone made it sound less like mercy and more like patience, the particular, terrible patience of a predator who'd simply decided the timing wasn't right yet. "You're not ready for what that mark would demand of you. Not yet. But I will be watching you, little Jinchuriki, very, very closely." He released Naruto's chin, straightening, already turning away with the same unhurried grace he'd arrived with. "Survive this forest. Survive this exam. I have a feeling our paths are going to cross again, and next time, I don't think either of us will be quite so restrained." He was gone before Naruto could summon the strength to respond, vanishing into the tree line with the same silent, fluid ease he'd emerged from it, the massive snake following behind him and leaving the clearing eerily, suddenly normal again. Birds resumed their calls somewhere overhead. Wind stirred the canopy. The unnatural stillness broke like it had never happened at all. Naruto lay where he'd fallen, chest heaving, every part of him screaming with pain, staring up at the thin strips of gray sky visible through the canopy far overhead. He managed, voice barely a rasp, hate snakes. And then, finally, mercifully, the world went dark. Water. That was the first thing Naruto registered, the cold, ankle-deep press of it against his bare feet, the particular echoing quality of a space too large to have any real edges. Pipes stretching up into darkness overhead like the ribs of something enormous that had swallowed him whole. He'd been here before. Not often, twice, maybe 3 times, in flashes he barely remembered afterward, moments of crisis where his mind had retreated somewhere deep and instinctual, while his body did whatever it needed to survive. But he'd never actually arrived here on purpose before, never walked these dim, water-slicked corridors with any real awareness of doing so. This time felt different. This time, the moment his eyes adjusted to the low, flickering light, he knew exactly where he was and exactly what was waiting for him at the end of the corridor stretching out ahead. "Guess I don't really have a choice about this one," Naruto muttered to himself, voice swallowed almost instantly by the cavernous space around him, and started walking. The corridor opened, eventually, into a massive chamber, impossibly large, water pooling across a floor that seemed to stretch to a horizon that shouldn't have existed inside a person's own mind. And at the far end of it, behind a set of bars taller than the Hokage monument itself, sealed with a single strip of paper bearing a single character, 2 enormous red eyes opened in the darkness, and fixed on him with an intensity that made every instinct Naruto possessed scream at him to turn around and run. He didn't run. He'd spent his whole life running from things that scared him less than this, and something about the day he just had, the fight, the fall, the humiliating, terrifying encounter with a man who could have killed him without breaking a sweat, had worn that particular instinct down to nothing. "Hey," Naruto said instead, walking closer to the bars despite every nerve in his body protesting the decision. "We need to talk." A low rumble answered him, not quite a growl, not quite a laugh. Something that vibrated through the water pooled at Naruto's feet and made ripples spread outward in slow, deliberate circles. "Do we?" Kurama said, the voice rolling out from the darkness beyond the bars like something enormous shifting its weight, unbothered and vast and ancient in a way that made Naruto feel very, very small. "And here I thought you'd come to thank me for keeping you breathing." "I mean, yeah, that too, probably," Naruto said, and winced slightly at how that came out, because gratitude had never exactly been his strong suit in the best of circumstances, let alone standing in front of a creature that had spent over a decade sealed inside him against its will. "But mostly I need to know what just happened. Back there, with the chakra, and the seal, and—" "You nearly died," Kurama cut in, flat and matter-of-fact, and something about the bluntness of it landed harder than any dramatic flourish could have. "That is what happened. You threw yourself, alone and untrained, against something old enough to remember when your entire village was nothing but a scattered handful of clans squabbling over territory. You survived because I chose to let you survive. Nothing more complicated than that. Naruto's jaw tightened. Chose to? What, you could have just let him take you. Let him take whatever he wanted. I could have done considerably less than I did, Kurama said, and the massive shape beyond the bars shifted, red eyes narrowing slightly. Do you understand what that snake wanted from you, boy? Not simply a taste of my chakra. He wanted to study the seal itself, to understand precisely how it was constructed, how it might be broken, replicated, or improved upon for his own purposes. Had he succeeded, the consequences would have extended considerably beyond your own small, insignificant life. Insignificant, Naruto repeated, something hot and stubborn flaring up in his chest despite the exhaustion, despite the fear still humming under his skin from the fight. Thanks. Really feeling the support here. Kurama's laugh, if that was what it was, rumbled through the water again, deeper this time, edged with something that might almost have been genuine amusement. You misunderstand me, little Uzumaki. I did not say your life was without value. I said it was insignificant to me, specifically, in the context of what that snake actually sought. My concern was never for your well-being. It was for my own continued existence, sealed as I am inside a body I did not choose and cannot easily replace. That's okay, that's honestly kind of worse, Naruto said, dragging a hand down his face. You're saying you saved me because it was convenient for you, not because you actually care what happens to me. I am saying, Kurama said, patient in the way something ancient and immovable could afford to be patient, that your survival and my own continued freedom from that man's hands happen, in this instance, to be the same outcome. Do not mistake shared self-interest for anything warmer than it is. Naruto sat down hard on the wet stone floor, ignoring the cold seeping up through his clothes, and stared up at those massive red eyes with something that had shifted, somewhere in the last few exchanges, from fear into a kind of tired, stubborn frustration. Fine, he said. Fine, whatever, shared self-interest, got it. So what happens next time? Because, and call me crazy, I've got a really bad feeling that guy wasn't kidding about wanting round 2. Alright, quick pause here, because I want to make sure everyone's tracking exactly what's happening in this conversation. In pretty much every version of this story you've seen, the Naruto and Kurama relationship builds slow, years of small moments, of borrowed chakra in emergencies, before anything resembling actual trust shows up between them. That's canon. That's the normal pace. Except normal pace assumes Naruto's got a support system around him buffering every crisis. Teammates, sensei, village backup. Right now, he's got none of that. He nearly died completely alone 20 minutes ago, and the only thing standing between him and Orochimaru deciding to just take what he wanted was whatever Kurama chose to do about it. That changes the math on this relationship a lot faster than it usually gets changed. Let's see exactly how much. He was not, Kurama said, and something in the massive fox's tone had shifted. Less lazy amusement now, more genuine, weighted consideration. That snake does not make idle threats, boy. If he has decided you are worth his continued attention, you will see him again. Perhaps not soon. Perhaps not in the manner you expect. But you will see him. Great, Naruto muttered. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. What you want and what is true are rarely the same thing, Kurama said, not unkindly, exactly, though there wasn't much softness in it either. You would do well to learn that lesson sooner rather than later, given the direction your life appears to be heading. Naruto pulled his knees up, wrapping his arms around them, staring at his own reflection rippling in the dark water pooled around him. So what do I do? Because I can't fight someone like that. Not even close. I felt how easy it was for him, Kurama. He barely tried and I still ended up flat on my back. There was a long pause, long enough that Naruto started to wonder if the fox had simply decided not to answer. If this whole conversation was going to end the same way most of his interactions with Kurama had ended so far, with silence, and distance, and the vague, uneasy sense of being tolerated rather than acknowledged. Then Kurama shifted, the massive shape beyond the bars settling lower, red eyes dropping to something closer to Naruto's own eye level, And when the voice came again, it carried a different weight than before. You survived, Kurama said, slow and deliberate. That is not nothing, boy. Do you understand how many shinobi twice your age, 3 times your training, would not have survived even the encounter you just endured? You are alive. You are conscious. You are, currently, sitting in front of me arguing rather than lying dead in a clearing somewhere. That is not a small accomplishment, however much it may feel like a failure to you. Naruto blinked up at him, caught off guard by something that sounded, for the first time since he'd stepped into this space, almost like genuine acknowledgement. You're not just saying that because it's convenient for you? I rarely say anything I do not mean, Kurama said, something dry creeping back into the tone. I simply do not often find things worth saying. Do not mistake infrequency for insincerity. There was a strange kind of comfort in that, Naruto realized, small, and grudging, and probably not exactly what most people would call comfort at all, but something in it settled a little of the cold, shaking fear still sitting in his chest since the fight. He'd faced something today that should have killed him. He hadn't died. Kurama, in whatever backhanded, self-interested way the fox operated, had made sure of that. Okay, Naruto said, pushing himself upright, forcing some of the old stubbornness back into his spine despite the ache in every muscle. Okay, so, shared self-interest. I get it. But if that snake's gonna come after me again, I can't just keep surviving on luck and whatever backup chakra you decide to throw my way when things get bad enough. I don't know. Something. A plan. Training. Anything. You need considerably more than a plan, Kurama said, something that might have been the beginning of real interest sharpening the ancient rumble of the fox's voice. But you are, for once, asking the correct question. That, at least, suggests some hope for you yet. Wow, thanks, Naruto said dryly. Really building my confidence here. I am not in the business of building confidence, Kurama said. I am in the business of not dying alongside a vessel too foolish to keep either of us alive. If those two goals happen to align with something resembling your confidence, so be it. Kurama shifted again, the massive form settling into something closer to stillness, and for a long moment the only sound in the cavernous space was the slow, steady drip of water somewhere far off in the darkness. Here is what I am prepared to offer, Kurama said eventually, and something in the tone had changed once more. Less lazy condescension now, more the careful, weighted cadence of a negotiation actually beginning in earnest. You are correct that relying on my chakra only in moments of desperation, doled out at my discretion, is not a sustainable arrangement for either of us. That snake will return. Others like him exist in this world, and you have already proven yourself the sort of fool who draws their attention without particularly trying. If I am to continue sharing this body with you, and given the alternative involves my own destruction alongside yours, I would very much prefer to continue doing so. I require something in return. Naruto straightened, wary but listening. What kind of something? Trust, Kurama said, and the word landed with a weight that surprised Naruto, coming from something that had spent their entire acquaintance treating him with barely disguised contempt. Not blind trust. Not the foolish, naive variety you extend so freely to nearly everyone you meet, human and otherwise. Earn trust. The kind built through actual demonstration, rather than granted on faith alone. Okay, Naruto said slowly. How do I demonstrate that? To a giant fox locked behind a cage in my own head? By asking, rather than simply taking, Kurama said. Every time you have drawn on my chakra thus far, it has been an act of desperation, a reflexive grasping in the final seconds before disaster, with no thought given to what you were actually pulling from or what it cost either of us. I am proposing something different. A deliberate exchange. You ask? I choose whether to grant it, and how much, based on the situation, and this is the part you will find least comfortable, based on whether I judge you worth the investment in that moment. Naruto frowned. That sounds like you get to just say no whenever you feel like it. Precisely, Kurama said, something almost like approval in the confirmation. Because that is what trust actually is, boy. Not a guarantee. Not an obligation. A choice, extended and re-extended based on whether it continues to be warranted. You do not simply declare trust into existence and expect it to hold. You build it, incident by incident, choice by choice, until eventually the choosing becomes less deliberate and more instinctive. That is how this works between people. It will be how it works between us as well, however unconventional the arrangement. It was, Naruto thought, a strange thing to hear from a creature that had spent over a decade sealed inside him without so much as a conversation, let alone anything resembling the slow, deliberate relationship building Kurama was describing. But something about the bluntness of it, the total absence of the kind of easy, hollow reassurance most people offered him when they wanted something, made it land harder, more real, than gentler words might have. Alright, Naruto said. So what's the first step? What do you actually want from me? Stop treating me as a weapon to be drawn only in emergencies, Kurama said. Come here. Talk to me, not simply when you are bleeding out on a forest floor, desperate and out of options, but deliberately, as one might visit an actual acquaintance. Ask me questions, listen to the answers, even when they are not the ones you want to hear. I have existed for longer than your entire village has stood, boy. I have watched shinobi rise and fall across generations you cannot begin to comprehend. There is considerably more I could offer you than emergency chakra reserves, if you were willing to actually seek it out rather than simply surviving from crisis to crisis. Naruto stared at him, at the massive, ancient shape looming beyond those bars, red eyes steady and unreadable in the dim light, and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't entirely have words for yet. It wasn't friendship. He wasn't naive enough, even now, even exhausted and shaken and desperate for any ally he could find, to mistake this for something as simple and warm as friendship. But it was something. An opening, a door left deliberately, grudgingly ajar where before there had only been a locked cage and a voice that mostly ignored him. Okay, he said finally, quietly. Okay, I can do that. I mean, I don't have anybody else to talk to right now anyway, so... He managed a small, tired huff of something almost like a laugh. Might as well be you. How flattering, Kurama said dryly. But there was something underneath the dryness that Naruto was almost certain, for the first time, sounded genuinely close to amused rather than simply mocking. I want to flag something here, because it's easy to miss if you're just following the conversation's surface level. Kurama's not offering friendship. He's explicit about that. This is self-interest, dressed up as negotiation, built on the very practical reality that a dead vessel is a dead Kurama too. But watch what's actually happening underneath that framing. For the first time in this entire story, somebody's asking Naruto to show up. Deliberately. Consistently. Not because he's desperate, not because he's bleeding out on a forest floor, but because the relationship itself is worth the investment. Naruto spent his whole life being someone people only paid attention to when it was convenient, or when he made enough noise that he couldn't be ignored. This is the first time, even from a giant fox who explicitly doesn't like him yet, that showing up consistently is actually the ask. That's going to matter. Keep it in your pocket. Now, Kurama said, shifting the conversation with an abruptness that told Naruto the sentimental portion of their exchange had officially concluded, given that you are, at this moment, unconscious in a forest with a wounded shoulder, cracked ribs, and chakra reserves scraped down to nearly nothing. I suggest we address the more immediate problem before either of us gets too comfortable discussing the philosophical foundations of trust. Right, Naruto said, wincing at the reminder of exactly how bad a state his actual, physical body was currently in. Yeah. That's probably important. I can offer you a measure of chakra to accelerate your recovery, Kurama said. Not the raw, corrosive burst I provided during your encounter with that snake. Something more measured, more sustainable, that will knit the worst of your injuries closed and restore enough strength for you to move under your own power again. It will not be pleasant. My chakra was not designed for gentle healing, and your body will register the process as considerably more painful than the injuries themselves for a short while. Naruto swallowed. How short a while are we talking? Painful enough that you will likely regret asking, Kurama said, with what Naruto was fairly certain was a note of grim amusement. But brief, and considerably preferable to lying unconscious and vulnerable in a forest that has already demonstrated, twice today, exactly how little mercy it extends to the weak. Yeah, okay, fair point. Naruto pushed himself fully upright, ignoring the way the water swirled cold around his ankles, and squared his shoulders as best he could manage. Do it. I can't just lie there. Sasuke and Sakura-chan are still out there somewhere, and I've got a scroll to deliver, and yeah? Do it. As you wish, Kurama said, and something in the massive shape beyond the bars shifted, a low, building pressure gathering in the space between them that made the water at Naruto's feet begin to ripple outward in wider, more insistent circles. One final thing, before you wake. Yeah? That snake said he would be watching you, Kurama said, red eyes narrowing slightly, voice dropping into something lower, more serious than anything that had come before in their exchange. He was not exaggerating, and he was not the only one who will be watching from this point forward. What you did today, surviving alone, defeating a coordinated team without assistance, drawing the attention of a Sannin and walking away breathing, that does not go unnoticed in a world like this one. You have made yourself visible, boy, in a way you were not visible before. That comes with consequences you are not yet equipped to fully understand. Naruto absorbed that, something heavy settling into his chest alongside the exhaustion and the lingering fear. So what do I do about it? You get stronger, Kurama said simply. Faster than you would have needed to, had this day gone differently. You stop treating your own growth as something that happens to you, incidentally, while you wait for someone else to notice and hand you the tools you need. You start seeking it out. Deliberately, the way you are about to start seeking out our conversations. A pause, weighted and deliberate. You are alone in this forest right now, Naruto Uzumaki. That is not entirely a tragedy. Pay attention to what it teaches you, and it may prove to be the single most valuable thing that happens to you this year. It was, Naruto thought, a strange kind of comfort to take from a day that had included a sinkhole, a beaten genin team, and a near-death encounter with one of the most dangerous missing nin in the world. But something about the way Kurama said it, blunt, unsentimental, entirely without the kind of hollow reassurance Naruto usually got from people trying to make him feel better, made it land as something closer to true than comforting words usually managed. All right, Naruto said, and meant it, feeling something steady settle into his spine despite everything. All right. Let's do this, then. The pressure building in the chamber surged forward, red chakra licking out from between the bars and thin, hissing tendrils that wrapped around him with a heat that was somehow both searing and strangely, distantly gentle, and the last thing Naruto heard before the world dissolved back into blinding, agonizing light was Kurama's voice, low and rough and almost, something like warm. Wake up, kid. This forest is not done with you yet, and neither, I suspect, are we. Naruto's eyes snapped open to the dim, green-filtered light of the forest canopy overhead, and the first thing he registered was pain, deep, burning, radiating out from his ribs and shoulder in waves that made him gasp and nearly black out all over again before it started, gradually, to recede into something merely awful instead of catastrophic. Ow, he managed, voice cracked and rough. Ow, ow, ow. He lay still for a long moment, breathing hard, letting the burning chakra finish its work, feeling bone and bruised muscle knit back together in a process that felt exactly as unpleasant as Kurama had promised, and somehow still less bad than actually dying would have been. When it finally faded, leaving him sore and drained but whole, he pushed himself upright, testing his shoulder experimentally, flexing fingers that had gone numb sometime during the fight. Functional. Not great. But functional. He checked his pack on reflex, scroll still there, thank every star in the sky, and forced himself to his feet, swaying slightly before finding his balance, taking stock of a forest that looked, on the surface, exactly as ordinary and dangerous as it had before Orochimaru had ever stepped out of the tree line. He's still out here somewhere, Naruto thought, scanning the tree line warily. Watching. He said he'd be watching. It should have terrified him more than it did. Maybe it would catch up to him later, once the adrenaline fully faded and the reality of what he'd survived actually settled in. Right now, though, standing alone in a clearing with a scroll in his pack, a fox's grudging almost friendship settling strange and new in his chest, and two teammates still out there somewhere he needed to find, Naruto felt something that surprised him. Not fear, exactly. Not confidence either, not really. He wasn't foolish enough to think one conversation with Kurama had suddenly made him a match for a Sannin. But something steadier than either. Something that felt, for the first time since the ground had opened up beneath his feet that morning, a little bit like purpose. All right, he said out loud, rolling his shoulder experimentally, wincing at the last lingering ache before setting his jaw and turning toward what he was fairly sure was still northeast. Sasuke. Sakura-chan, I'm coming. He huffed a short, tired laugh. Just give me a minute to figure out how, because apparently everything in this forest wants me dead today. He started walking. Behind his navel, something ancient and vast and grudgingly, newly invested in his survival settled into a low, watchful quiet, not gone, not distant the way it had always been before, but present in a way it hadn't quite managed before today. Neither of them had any idea yet just how much that was about to matter. Naruto had been walking for maybe 20 minutes since climbing out of his own head, favoring his healing ribs, when the first sign of trouble crossed his path. Not an attack, not yet, just a faint disturbance in the underbrush a good distance to his left, gone as quickly as he noticed it. He froze mid-step, every muscle he had left tensing despite the ache still radiating through his side. Okay. That's not nothing. He waited, breath held, scanning the tree line for any further sign of movement. Nothing came. No rustle, no shift of shadow, no telltale glint of a headband catching what little light made it down through the canopy. After nearly a full minute of dead silence, he let his breath out slow and forced himself to keep moving, though every step now came a little more careful, a little more deliberate than before. Kurama. You picking up on anything? Something is tracking you, the fox's voice came back, low and immediate in a way that made Naruto's stomach drop even as some small, strange part of him registered how quickly the answer had come this time. No delay, no dismissive silence, just a straightforward response to a straightforward question. Has been, for the better part of 10 minutes. Whoever it is knows how to move quietly. I would not have noticed at all, had I not been paying closer attention than usual. Great. Awesome. Love that for me. Naruto kept his pace steady, resisting the urge to spin around and confront whatever was following him, because if there was one lesson he'd already absorbed hard today, it was that panicking rarely improved his odds of anything. Any idea how many? Or who? One, as far as I can determine. Possibly more, hanging back further. I am not omniscient, boy. I sense chakra, not intentions. Fair enough. Naruto kept walking, adjusting his route in small, deliberate increments, angling toward denser undergrowth, toward terrain that would make an ambush harder to pull off cleanly, all while keeping his pace casual enough that whoever was tracking him wouldn't realize he'd clocked them. It was, he thought with a flicker of grim pride, exactly the kind of tactical thinking Sasuke usually handled for both of them. Funny how fast you picked that stuff up when there wasn't anybody else around to do it for you. The attack, when it came from above. Naruto barely had a half-second of warning, a shift in the canopy's shadow pattern, a faint whisper of displaced air, before he threw himself sideways on pure reflex, rolling hard across the forest floor as a blade sank into the exact spot he'd been standing a moment before, embedding itself in packed earth with enough force to bury half its length. Not bad, said a voice from above, amused and faintly mocking, as a figure dropped down from the branches to land in a low, easy crouch beside the buried blade. Most people don't dodge that one. The genin who'd attacked him wore an Iwadakure headband, lean and sharp-featured, with the kind of unbothered confidence that came from either genuine skill or a truly spectacular overestimation of his own abilities. Naruto suspected, given how close that blade had actually come, that it was probably the former. You're the one who's been following me, Naruto said, pushing himself upright, kunai already in hand. Word travels, the Iwa genin said with a shrug, retrieving his blade from the dirt with a casual tug. Konoha Kid, alone, took down a whole Taki squad by himself a couple hours back. Figured either you're way stronger than you look, or you're running on fumes after a fight like that and an easy target besides. He tilted his head, studying Naruto with open, assessing interest. Guessing it's probably a bit of both. He's not wrong, Naruto thought grimly, feeling the lingering ache in his ribs, the way his chakra reserves, even after Kurama's healing bursts, still sat noticeably lower than they should. Definitely a bit of both. Only one way to find out, Naruto said instead, out loud, forcing bravado into his voice that he only half felt. Come on then. Let's see. The Iwa genin, solo, apparently, no visible teammates backing him up, which was either reckless or meant he was confident enough in his own skill not to need them, grinned and came in fast, blade flashing in a series of quick, precise strikes that Naruto barely managed to deflect, kunai ringing against steel hard enough to numb his fingers. This guy's fast. Naruto gave ground, blocking and dodging in a rapid retreat that put distance between them just long enough to catch his breath, hands already moving through the seal for a clone. Faster than the Taki team. Definitely trained harder, or trained different, or... The clone popped into existence at his side and immediately caught a strike meant for the original, buying half a second that Naruto used to scramble back further, putting a fallen log between himself and his opponent. Clones, huh? The IWA Genin said, unimpressed, already closing the distance again despite the obstacle. Yeah, I heard about that too. Guess I should have expected it. He came around the log fast, blade catching the clone across the chest and dispelling it in a puff of smoke, and Naruto, real Naruto, breathing hard, ribs aching with every sharp movement, barely got his kunai up in time to deflect the follow-up strike aimed at his own throat. Okay, this one's actually dangerous. This isn't the Taki team. This guy knows what he's doing. Then stop fighting fair, Kurama's voice cut through, sharp and immediate. You are not obligated to win this the clean way, boy. You are obligated to survive it. Kind of already figured that part out, thanks, Naruto thought back, mostly to keep some semblance of humor going even as panic started creeping up the back of his throat, and threw himself sideways to avoid another strike that came close enough to nick the fabric of his jacket. He needed an opening. Something. Anything that wasn't just trading blows with someone clearly more skilled, more experienced, and considerably less exhausted than he currently was. His eyes flicked across the terrain, dense undergrowth, uneven ground riddled with exposed roots, the kind of environment that punished careless footing but could, if used right, work in his favor instead. There. Naruto feinted left, drawing his opponent's blade in a wide arc, then dropped low and hard, sweeping his leg through a tangle of roots directly in the IWA Genin's path. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the kind of technique anyone would have taught him in a classroom, but the Genin's foot caught, just enough, just for a half-second of unbalanced surprise, and Naruto used every scrap of that opening to drive a solid, desperate punch into his opponent's ribs before scrambling back out of retaliation range. Ow, okay, that actually hurt, the IWA Genin admitted, wincing, though the grin on his face hadn't faded one bit. Alright. Not bad for a guy running on fumes. Let's see how much more you've got left in the tank. Not much, Naruto thought grimly, feeling the burn in his legs, the way his breath was coming faster and shallower than it should this early into a fight. Not nearly enough. Real quick, I want you to notice something here, because it's easy to miss in the middle of the action. This isn't Naruto winning through overwhelming force, the way the fight with the Taki team kind of was. This is Naruto scraping by on terrain awareness, on reading his environment, on using every dirty, unglamorous trick available to someone who genuinely cannot afford to fight fair right now. That's a different kind of growth than raw power. That's the kind that comes from being backed into a corner with nobody around to bail you out. Let's see if it's enough. The fight dragged on in short, brutal exchanges, Naruto giving ground more often than he took it, relying on clones to buy split-second openings, on terrain tricks to slow his opponent down, on sheer, stubborn refusal to actually go down even as the accumulated damage started stacking up in ways he could feel in every labored breath. A shallow cut opened along his forearm where he blocked a strike a half-second too slow. His already aching ribs took another glancing blow that stole the air from his lungs and left him gasping, stumbling back into a crouch that only barely counted as a defensive stance anymore. The IWA Genin, to his credit, didn't press the advantage the way he easily could have. He held back, watching Naruto with an expression that had shifted somewhere from amused confidence into something more careful, more evaluating. You're not stopping, he observed, almost curious, circling slowly rather than closing in for what should have been an easy finish. Most people would have tapped out by now. Or just, stayed down. Not really an option, Naruto managed between ragged breaths, forcing himself back upright despite every screaming protest from his body. Got people counting on me. Can't exactly explain to them I lost because some IWA guy hit harder than I expected. Something flickered across the Genin's face at that, not quite sympathy, not quite respect, but something adjacent to both. He lowered his blade slightly, just slightly, studying Naruto with new, sharper focus. You said you've got a scroll already, he said. Heaven, right? That's what the Taki kids were saying, before they slunk back to lick their wounds. Yeah, Naruto admitted warily, not sure where this was going, kunai still raised despite how much his arm wanted to drop it. What about it? I've got an Earth Scroll, the IWA Genin said, and there was something almost rueful in the admission, like he hadn't planned on sharing this particular piece of information but found himself doing it anyway. Was gonna take yours by force, use both to pass solo, figured that'd be the easy play against someone already worn down. But, he paused, glancing Naruto over once more, something in his expression settling into decision. Nah. You've earned better than getting robbed after a fight like that. Naruto blinked, caught completely off guard. Wait, what? I'm saying, the Genin said, sheathing his blade with a fluid, unhurried motion that felt almost aggressively casual given the fight they'd just been in. There's easier scrolls to steal in this forest than one belonging to a guy who fought me solo on fumes and didn't go down. Not really interested in being the reason you failed this exam when there's 100 easier targets running around out here. Huh, Naruto said, lowering his kunai slowly, still braced for some kind of trick even as none seemed forthcoming. That's kind of decent of you. Don't get used to it, the IWA Genin said, already turning to leave, throwing a last, faintly amused look back over his shoulder. Next exam, next round. I won't be feeling generous. Name's Kotetsu, by the way, not that guy from the tower, different Kotetsu, long story. Remember it. Might be seeing you again somewhere down the line. He vanished into the tree line without further ceremony, leaving Naruto standing alone in a churned-up patch of forest floor, breathing hard, bleeding lightly from the cut on his arm, and thoroughly bewildered by how that entire encounter had ended. Okay, he said out loud, mostly to himself, mostly to process the fact that he was somehow still standing. That was, huh? Didn't expect that. Do not mistake one act of mercy for a pattern, Kurama's voice cut in, dry as ever. That one judge the cost of taking your scroll higher than the reward. That is calculation, not kindness. The next one you meet may calculate differently. Yeah, I figured, Naruto thought back, though something in his chest had loosened slightly all the same. Still. Nice to catch a break for once today. He didn't get long to enjoy it. Naruto had barely covered another quarter-mile. Moving slower now, more cautious, ribs and forearm both throbbing with a persistent, nagging ache that no amount of forced optimism was quite managing to ignore, when the forest around him shifted in a way that had nothing to do with hostile genin at all. The ground trembled. Not the sharp, sudden collapse of the sinkhole that had started this whole mess. Something slower, heavier, rhythmic, the unmistakable cadence of something enormous moving through the underbrush somewhere close enough that Naruto could hear branches snapping and undergrowth crushing flat beneath a weight that made his stomach drop straight through the forest floor. Please don't be another snake. Please don't be another. It wasn't a snake. What crashed through the tree line a moment later, splintering a good stretch of undergrowth in the process, was something Naruto had absolutely no reference point for. A massive, tusked creature, easily the size of a small building, moving with the kind of unstoppable momentum that suggested it had never once in its life needed to worry about anything getting in its way. Oh, come on, Naruto shouted, already scrambling backward as the creature's small, furious eyes locked onto him with the particular, single-minded focus of something that had decided he was either a threat or a meal and didn't much care which. Is everything in this forest trying to kill me today? The creature charged. Naruto threw himself sideways with a speed that owed more to pure terror than any actual training, rolling hard across packed earth as the massive beast tore through the space he'd occupied a half-second earlier, splintering a young tree entirely in half with what looked like minimal effort. Okay, this thing is not something I can fight. This thing is something I need to not be near, as fast as humanly possible. Agreed, Kurama said, with the particular flat urgency of a creature that had also, apparently, not been expecting quite this level of chaos. Run, boy. This is not pride. This is simple survival mathematics. Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled upright and ran, ribs screaming in protest with every jarring step. the massive creature wheeling around behind him with a bellow that shook loose leaves from branches 30 feet overhead and set off through the underbrush in pursuit with a speed that seemed genuinely, unfairly impossible for something its size. It's fast. It's way too fast for something that big. How is that fair? He cut hard between two closely spaced trees, hoping the tight gap might slow the creature down even marginally, and felt a surge of something close to hope when he heard the beast crash into the obstacle behind him rather than smoothly navigating around it. The hope lasted exactly as long as it took the creature to simply tear through the smaller of the two trees entirely, splintered wood exploding outward as it barreled on in pursuit without so much as breaking stride. Okay, that plan's out. New plan. New plan. Naruto's eyes caught on a steep, root-tangled slope rising sharply to his left, too narrow and uneven for something the creature's size to navigate at speed, and he threw himself toward it without a second thought, scrambling up loose earth and exposed roots with hands that were shaking as much from adrenaline as exhaustion. The creature slammed into the base of the slope behind him, bellowing in frustration, massive tusks tearing furrows into the earth as it tried and failed to find purchase on terrain that simply wasn't built for something its size. Naruto kept climbing, not daring to look back, until he'd put a solid 20 feet of elevation between himself and a creature that was, mercifully, apparently not built for scaling anything steeper than gently rolling forest floor. He collapsed at the top of the slope, chest heaving, every muscle in his body screaming in unified protest, and watched from what he desperately hoped was a safe distance as the massive creature paced at the base of the incline for a long, tense minute before finally, grudgingly, losing interest and crashing back off into the underbrush in search of easier prey. I hate this forest, Naruto managed between ragged breaths, flat on his back, staring up at the thin strips of gray sky visible far overhead. I hate it so much. Whoever designed this exam needs to seriously rethink some things. For what it is worth, Kurama offered, was something that might have been the ghost of actual sympathy buried under the usual dry detachment. You are handling considerably more than most genin your age would survive intact. That is not nothing. Feels like nothing right now, Naruto muttered, though something in the acknowledgement did settle a little of the shaking exhaustion in his chest. He lay there a moment longer, catching his breath, before forcing himself back upright with a groan. Okay, come on. Sasuke, Sakura-chan, wherever you are, I'm coming, I promise. I'm just having, like, the single worst day of my entire life trying to get there. You know, I keep saying this every chapter, but I mean it every single time. This is not how this day was supposed to go for him. In the story you already know, Naruto's biggest obstacle in the forest of death is a hungry stomach and some hurt feelings about being left out of the real action. He's supposed to be the comic relief here, the guy standing safely off to the side while Sasuke handles the real danger. Instead he's fought off 3 genin solo, survived a direct encounter with a Sannin, had the single strangest heart-to-heart of his life with a giant fox, gotten ambushed by an IWA genin who almost took his scroll, and just barely escaped getting trampled by something the size of a small house. And it's not even sundown yet. Let's see what the forest's got left for him. The next hour passed in a kind of grim, exhausted rhythm, Naruto moving as steadily as his battered body allowed, staying alert for any further sign of pursuit or ambush, calling out for Sasuke and Sakura at intervals that grew shorter and more desperate the longer the silence dragged on without answer. His chakra reserves, even bolstered by Kurama's earlier healing burst, were running dangerously low. His stomach had moved past ordinary hunger into the kind of hollow, gnawing ache that made concentration difficult and decision-making sluggish. He was, by any honest measure, running on fumes. And the forest, it seemed, was not remotely finished testing exactly how far those fumes would carry him. The second ambush came without the courtesy of a warning tremor or a distant hiss. One moment Naruto was pushing through a dense stretch of underbrush, scanning the tree line out of habit more than genuine alertness at this point. The next, Saban were raining down from the canopy in a tight, coordinated pattern that would have caught him dead center if pure exhausted instinct hadn't sent him diving sideways a half-second before impact. Persistent, said a familiar voice, and Naruto's stomach dropped as Mei, the Taki Kunoichi from earlier, jaw still faintly bruised from their first encounter, dropped down from the branches above, flanked by Daisuke and a visibly wary Kenji, all three looking considerably less battered than the last time Naruto had seen them, and considerably more determined. "You've gotta be kidding me," Naruto groaned, scrambling upright, every aching muscle in his body screaming in protest at the prospect of round 2. "Seriously? You guys again?" "We talked it over," Daisuke said, cracking his knuckles with the particular grim satisfaction of someone who'd spent the last hour stewing over a loss. "Figured you'd be worn down by now. Figured that made this a much fairer fight than round 1. That's okay. That's honestly a pretty smart read of the situation," Naruto admitted, backing up warily, doing rapid, unhappy math on exactly how little chakra he had left to work with. "Doesn't mean I'm thrilled about it, though. We're not looking for a repeat of last time," Mei said, Saban already spinning between her fingers with practiced ease. "We want that heaven scroll back. And we're not particularly interested in being merciful about how we get it, given the state you left Kenji in earlier." "Great. Awesome. Exactly what I needed right now." "You do not have the reserves for a full clone assault this time," Kurama warned, sharp and immediate. "Whatever you do, it needs to cost considerably less than what you spent on the last engagement." "Yeah, I'm kind of getting that, thanks," Naruto thought back grimly, forcing his stance into something that vaguely resembled readiness despite every part of him wanting nothing more than to simply lie down and stop moving for a solid hour. Out loud, he said, "Look, I get it, I really do. You want the scroll back, I took it fair and square. I'm not exactly thrilled about round 2 either. But I'm gonna be straight with you, I'm running on nothing right now. You want this scroll, you're gonna have to actually earn it, because I am not just handing it over." "Didn't figure you would," Daisuke said, already shifting into a low, ready stance. "Wasn't really planning on asking twice." The fight that followed was nothing like the first one. There was no overwhelming swarm of clones this time, no confident tactical maneuvering, just Naruto, running dangerously low on everything, forced to rely on raw stubbornness, and whatever scraps of instinct and improvisation he had left to keep from getting overwhelmed by 3 genin who'd clearly spent the last hour specifically strategizing around beating him. He managed a single clone, just one, chakra reserves protesting even that small expenditure, and used it as a decoy while he scrambled for cover behind a cluster of dense roots, buying himself a few precious seconds to think. Think, come on. His eyes swept the terrain, hunting for any advantage, any environmental quirk he could twist into an opening the way he had against the IWA genin earlier. The ground here was uneven, riddled with loose stone and shallow depressions from root systems long since rotted away. Not much. But maybe. Mei's Simban found his shoulder before he'd finished the thought, a sharp, burning line of pain that made him gasp and stumble, and Daisuke was already closing the distance to press the advantage. Fist cocked back for a strike that Naruto only barely managed to duck under by dropping into an ungainly, half-controlled fall that scraped his palms bloody against loose stone. Okay, this isn't working. "I need," asked Kurama's voice cut through, sudden and sharp. "You asked me to teach you to ask rather than simply take. Here is your chance to prove you meant it. I can grant you a measured burst, enough to turn this fight, not enough to drain you dangerously. But only if you actually ask, rather than reflexively grasping the way you always have before." Naruto, scrambling backward from another strike, ribs screaming, chakra scraped nearly to nothing, didn't have much room left for pride. "Kurama, please. I need this. Not the whole thing, not just enough to get through this, please." The response came instantly, a warm, steady pulse of chakra flooding through him, nothing like the raw, corrosive burst that had answered Orochimaru's threat earlier, but something more controlled, more deliberate, settling into his exhausted limbs like a second wind arriving right when he needed it most. "There," Kurama said, something almost satisfied in the tone. "Now show me it was worth the granting." Naruto came up out of his defensive crouch with new strength humming through tired muscles, and the shift in momentum was immediate and obvious. Daisuke's next strike met a block that actually held. Mei's Saban deflected with a speed that hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. It wasn't overwhelming power. It wasn't the kind of dramatic transformation that turned a losing fight into an easy victory. But it was enough to hold his ground, enough to push back, enough to turn 3 against 1 exhausted genin into something closer to an actually even fight. "He's got something left in the tank after all," Daisuke muttered, grudging respect creeping into his voice even as he pressed the attack harder. "Yeah," Naruto said, forcing a grin through the exhaustion and pain, "turns out I do." The fight that followed was hard-fought and ugly, nobody landing a clean, decisive advantage for several long, brutal minutes, until, in a moment that would later strike Naruto as more luck than skill, Kenji overextended on a strike meant to catch Naruto's exposed side, and Naruto twisted away just enough that the blow instead caught Daisuke, who'd closed in from the opposite angle at exactly the wrong moment. The resulting confusion, Daisuke swearing, stumbling into Mei, the whole formation collapsing into a tangle of surprised limbs, gave Naruto exactly the opening he needed. He didn't press for a decisive victory. He didn't have the reserves left for one, and some exhausted, clear-headed part of him recognized that trying would be a mistake. Instead, he simply ran, cutting hard through a gap in the underbrush while his three opponents were still untangling themselves, putting distance between them as fast as his battered, aching legs would carry him. "Not worth it!" He heard Daisuke shout somewhere behind him, and to Naruto's immense relief, nobody gave chase. He kept running long after the sounds of pursuit, real or imagined, had faded entirely, not stopping until his legs simply refused to carry him another step, collapsing against the trunk of a massive tree with his chest heaving, blood trickling from a half-dozen small cuts, and one shoulder throbbing sharp and hot where Mei's Saman had caught him. That, Naruto managed between ragged breaths, was the worst day of my entire life. I need everyone to know that. Officially. On the record. "You are still breathing," Kurama pointed out, dry as ever, though something in the tone carried a thread of what might genuinely have been approval. "That, given everything this forest has thrown at you today, is not a small accomplishment." "Yeah, well, ask me again in an hour," Naruto muttered, letting his head fall back against the rough bark, eyes sliding closed for just a moment against the exhaustion pressing down on him like a physical weight. "Feels like this forest's got at least 3 more things lined up to try and kill me before the day's out." He didn't mean it as anything more than tired, bitter exaggeration. He had no way of knowing, slumped against that tree trunk with the light starting to fail overhead, just how close to true it was about to turn out to be, or that somewhere not too far off through the trees, a coordinated, disciplined team was about to cross his path in a way that would force him to confront something considerably harder than exhaustion and hostile genin. Something that would make him look, for the first time all day, at exactly what he was missing by doing all of this alone.